Well, we know right now there's a problem in America in that young people don't really want to become scientists. And sometimes that's because they're not having enough experiences to show them that they can do science, that they can be good at it, and they have a lot to contribute as scientists and engineers in our society. But at other times, a lot of young people are turned off just because they hear negative stereotypes or they've had bad experiences with science in school or something that they weren't good at. And so I think if you look at after school and the learning principles, I think it's a way to really look at science education and take a step back and say, is it really about knowing facts and figures? Is it really about rote memorization? Or is it actually about doing science? And if you think about what scientists do, they are active and hands-on, and they make things and break things. They talk to their peers. They learn from their mistakes, and they get better through time. And so if we can take some of those things that scientists do in their everyday lives and take those science principles and think about them as learning principles, I think we're going to do a much better job of engaging youth. They're going to understand that science is not about a textbook. It's not about what we know. Actually, scientists think of all the questions we have about the world. Why does it work that way? Why doesn't it work this way? How can I contribute to understanding the world around us? And if we think of science as that, as discovery and curiosity and trying to understand how you fit into the world, if you look at the learning principles, that's what that encourages. So what I'm excited about the learning principles is this idea that we're looking at science education as part of the development of a young person, and that it could be about science, it could be about art, it could be about a lot of other things. But if science is included in that mix, I think it opens up the horizons for lots of young people who may not have thought that they could be scientists or engineers when they grow up. One of the most interesting learning principles in my mind is the one about collaboration, because studies have shown that one of the reasons young people do not go into science is because they think that scientists work alone and they're isolated. And in fact, most scientists would think that they're very collaborative in their work. A lot of big teams are needed to really tackle some of the biggest questions in science. So if you think about, looking for life on other planets, or you think about how to invent new medicine, all of those take a team of scientists and engineers to work together. And so for scientists, we think of our work as collaborative. We email people all over the world with our ideas, and we hear their criticism and their critiques, and that's how we do science. And so for scientists, collaboration is a key part of what we do every day. And yet most young people think that scientists work alone in their labs blowing things up. And so I think I like the collaboration learning principle, and to make sure that when we do science, we encourage people to think of science as a collaborative effort, because that's what it is in today's society. Another one of the learning principles I think is really key for science education is the active hands-on principle. One of the problems that most educators acknowledge is that in the classroom now, kids just don't have enough time to do science the way we think it should be done. In other words, with their hands being messy and their minds being engaged and asking questions and trying things out. When they come up with hypotheses, predict what they should be doing, and then test to see whether they're right or not. That to us is the kind of science education that should be going on inside the classroom and outside of the classroom. But with the limitations in classes now, with the kinds of class size, lack of supplies, the lack of time, and the focus on standardized exams, I think it's really incumbent on the after-school and out-of-school environments to provide that hands-on science engagement that kids just aren't getting enough of. One of the things that's really disheartening, I think, as a scientist is that I think of kids as natural scientists. I have a 2-year-old at home, and he wants to know what everything, does. He wants to know what it's called. And that sense of curiosity and discovery is really key to science. And so what we're doing, I think, in formal education is because of the reliance on textbooks, and there's very specific ways of doing things and so much focus on the non-science subjects, that kids just don't have the time to explore their interests about nature and about science. And so I think one of the limitations in formal education now is just the lack of time and the emphasis on standardized learning rather than the hands-on, open-ended questions that I think real science learning really needs to have. Kids aren't going to want to go into scientists if they think that we know all the answers, and they need to know that there's actually a lot of questions out there, and their questions are just as good as anybody else's. I think, to me, when we think about STEM and we think about STEM education, so often we're focused on the facts. So kids need to know about photosynthesis, or they need to know about geometry, or they need to know a specific thing that's in the textbook. And when we talk about learning principles, we're taking a step beyond just the facts and figures and the strict content. What we're saying is, when kids are engaged in STEM, we want them to learn certain skills, we want them to be able to master certain practices, and I think most importantly, we want them to see that they're capable of doing science. And so when we talk about learning principles, we're taking an open-minded approach to what children need to learn. We're not saying they need to know A, B, and C. We're saying let them explore. Let them find out what they can do on their own. Let them be so inspired that they want to learn more about science, that they're doing it on their off hours, they're talking to their parents about it, or they're talking to their peers about it. If we can get kids to be interested in science in that fundamental way, that's the kind of learning we really want to engage. That's going to make a difference in inspiring the next generation of scientists. I think one of the most important things is to think about STEM as not a checklist of content that you have to cover. So it's not about, okay, today we have to do something about the planets, tomorrow we have to do something about plants, and then we've got to do rocks the next week. Even though I like all those three topics, the reality is that if we think of STEM as something that's creative and hands-on and gets kids to ask questions, that's what we want to do. And if teaching about rocks does that, that's great. But it won't be successful, high-quality science learning if it's not active and collaborative and fosters a sense of identity with science. If we don't get kids excited about science, then they can learn as many facts and figures that their pretty brains can hold, but that's not really going to help our society, and it's not going to help them as individuals when they grow up. If we can get kids to realize that science and engineering is part of their everyday life, and that as youth they have a stake in the future of their country and the future of the globe, and that by learning science they can make a difference in the world, I think that's the kind of accomplishment we would like to see. To me, success in science learning is if we can inspire kids to want to become scientists, or at least to want to engage with science, that they don't find it boring and they understand that science can solve some of our major problems. I think the other thing is that for many of our communities, economic justice means being able to find a good job that pays well, that allows you to support your family and gives you a really good shot at the American dream. And science allows you to do that. If you can get a science degree, if you can get a science job, if you can be technologically literate, that opens up the world to you and allows you to do so many things for your family and your community that you can't do without that STEM background. So I think for that reason, for economic justice, social justice for our communities, we need to allow kids to see that they can become scientists and then pursue that dream.